Joe Angelo is a animal of the worst kind. How the Lord could create such a horrible human being, I do not know.
He robbed my sister Katie and brother-in-law Brian of their young lives. He took away their chance to have a family of their own.
Where we had so much hope for our future, Joe D'Angelo attacked us while we were sleeping. Kidnapped me from my bed. He raped me repeatedly. He sodomized me. He forced oral copulation.
And I wake up to this guy standing in my room, and he's got a revolver in his hand.
My safety and security were taken away from me that night.
Locked my sister in her room and performed horrific acts against my mother while she was bound and blindfolded.
On October 5th, when you broke into my home in the early hours, just after my husband had left for work, and you shoved your knife into my neck, you bound my wrist and ankles, you blindfolded me, and then gagged me with a cloth. Remember that? But you also did the same to my precious 3-year-old son. How dare you?
In the 1970s, California was the promised land. A landscape of sun-drenched suburbs, manicured lawns, and unlocked doors. It was a place built on a foundation of safety, a world where the greatest fears were confined to the movie screen. But that collective dream was about to be systematically dismantled, house by house, life by life, by a shadow who moved through the night. He had many names, each one a chapter in a sprawling story of terror. The Visalia Ransacker, the East Area Rapist, the original Night Stalker. For 12 years, he was a phantom who committed at least 13 murders, more than 50 rapes, and over 120 burglaries, leaving behind a trail of violated homes and shattered lives. He was a meticulous predator who studied his victims, learned their routines, and then, in the dead of night, turned their sanctuaries into stages for sadistic rituals. And then, in 1986, he vanished. For decades, he was a ghost, a cold case file, a boogeyman who haunted the memories of an entire generation. The hunt for him became a national obsession, a puzzle with no solution, until a new kind of science, born from the simple human desire to find one's roots, was turned into a weapon. A weapon that would search not for the killer, but for his family, hidden in plain sight within the vast, digital ocean of the human genome. The story begins not in the sprawling suburbs of Sacramento, but in the quiet, unassuming farm town of Visalia, in California's Central Valley. In 1974, a phantom began to haunt its neighborhoods. He was called the Visalia Ransacker, a name that failed to capture the intimate and disturbing nature of his crimes. He was a prolific burglar, responsible for over 120 break-ins. But he wasn't interested in television sets or stereos. He was a collector of memories. He would slip into homes and steal items of purely sentimental value. A single earring, a wedding ring, piggy banks filled with a child's savings. He would move through the bedrooms, scattering women's underwear across the floor, a clear, sexualized signature of his presence. He was a ghost who didn't just steal property, he stole peace of mind. He also stole weapons and ammunition, methodically arming himself for a war he alone was planning to wage. What no one knew, what no one could possibly imagine, was that the man they were hunting was already inside the system. Just a town away, in Exeter, a young, stocky police officer named Joseph James D'Angelo was working in the burglary unit. He was a Navy veteran with a degree in criminal justice, a man who told the local paper his job was serving the community. While his colleagues investigated the ransacker, D'Angelo was learning. He was studying their patterns, their response times, their methods of investigation, all while perfecting his own dark craft in the night. On September 11th, 1975, the ransacker's apprenticeship in terror graduated to murder. In the pre-dawn hours, he broke into the home of Claude Snelling, a local journalism professor. His target was Snelling's 16-year-old daughter, Beth. She awoke to a man in a ski mask, whispering, "You're coming with me, don't scream or I'll stab you." He began dragging her from her room, but her father heard the struggle. Claude Snelling ran to save his daughter. The intruder kicked Beth in the face, turned his gun on her father, and fired twice. Claude Snelling died on his own back patio, a hero who gave his life to stop an abduction. The bullet that killed him was fired from a revolver the ransacker had stolen in a previous burglary. The violation was no longer just of property, it was of life itself. A few months later, the ransacker's luck almost ran out. During a police stakeout, Detective William McGowan confronted a prowler matching the ransacker's description. The man feigned surrender before pulling a revolver and firing at the detective, the bullet striking his flashlight and saving his life. The suspect escaped into the night. And then, the Visalia Ransacker vanished. The burglaries stopped. The town breathed a collective sigh of relief, believing the nightmare was over. They were wrong. The monster had simply moved on. In June of 1976, the terror began again, 200 miles to the north. The location was Sacramento County, a sprawling landscape of middle-class suburbs like Rancho Cordova and Carmichael. The crimes were different now, more brutal, more personal. This new predator was given a name that reflected his new obsession, the East Area Rapist. And just as his crime spree began, Joseph D'Angelo started a new job. In August 1976, he pinned on a badge for the Auburn Police Department, right in the heart of the territory the rapist now claimed as his own. The East Area Rapist was a master of psychological warfare. He was meticulous. He would stalk homes for weeks, learning the routines of his victims, sometimes entering their houses when they were away to unlock a window or study family photos. He attacked at night, waking his victims with the blinding beam of a flashlight. He spoke through clenched teeth in a guttural whisper that victims would never forget. He was an athletic man, capable of vaulting fences to escape, and he was always masked, always gloved, leaving behind almost no forensic evidence. His ritual was one of profound sadism and humiliation, especially when he targeted couples. He would force the woman to bind her husband or boyfriend with shoelaces, making her a participant in her own nightmare. Then, he would place a stack of dishes on the man's back, a fragile tower of porcelain and glass. He would whisper a threat. If he heard the plates rattle, he would kill them both. For hours, the victims would lie there, paralyzed by fear, while he ransacked their homes, ate food from their refrigerators, and returned to rape the woman again and again. The attacks were marathons of terror that could last for 2, even 3 hours. The emotional devastation was absolute. Chris Pedretti was just 15 when he appeared in her home the week before Christmas. "I was a normal 15-year-old kid," she would later say in court. "My world was small, predictable, and safe." That night, as he held a knife to her, she was certain she was going to die. "I sang 'Jesus Loves Me' in my head as I waited to die." The attack stole her youth, her faith, and her trust. For decades, she lived with the fear that she could pass him in a grocery store, sit near him in a restaurant, completely oblivious to the fact that the man who had destroyed her world was just a few feet away. The fear spread like a contagion. As Special Agent Marcus Knutson of the FBI recalled, "Everyone was afraid. We had people sleeping with shotguns. We had people purchasing dogs. People were concerned, and they had a right to be. This guy was terrorizing the community." The rapist seemed to revel in the panic he created. He began to taunt the police, speaking through his victims. During one attack, he growled a message for investigators. "Tell those pigs, if I hear about this, I'm going to go out tomorrow night and kill 2 people. People are going to die." Detective Carol Daly of the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department was tasked with interviewing the victims, often arriving at crime scenes while their wrists were still raw from the bindings. She listened to story after story of the same methodical horror, creating exhaustive reports that chronicled the terror but offered few clues to the man's identity. The pressure was immense. Being blindfolded, bound tightly, fear running through your thoughts, she later recalled.
If you are going to defend yourself, you must injure your attacker.
Stomachs on fire with fear and having to lie there for so long. She woke every morning expecting the call that the rapist had finally escalated to murder. That call came on February 2nd, 1978. Brian and Katie Maggiore, a young married couple, were walking their poodle in their Rancho Cordova neighborhood when they were chased down and shot to death. The attack was sudden, public, and brutal. It confirmed what investigators had long feared. The East Area Rapist was not just a rapist, he was a killer. The attack, retired Detective Ray Biondi said, threw a whole different light on the rape series. The boogeyman in the suburbs now had a body count. For another year and a half, the attacks continued across Northern California, spreading to Stockton, Modesto, and the Bay Area. Victims reported he was becoming more unstable, sometimes weeping during the assaults and cursing the name Bonnie, the name of Joseph D'Angelo's former fiancée, who had broken off their engagement years earlier after he threatened her with a gun. Then, in July 1979, he was caught off guard. A couple in Danville fought back, shouting and running from their house. The rapist fled. It was his last reported attack in Northern California. 3 weeks later, Auburn police officer Joseph D'Angelo was arrested for shoplifting a hammer and a can of dog repellent from a drugstore. He was fired from the police force, and just like that, the East Area Rapist, who had committed nearly 50 brutal sexual assaults and 2 murders, disappeared. The phone calls stopped. The attacks ended. An uneasy silence fell over Northern California. The Phantom was gone again, leaving behind a map of fear and a question that would haunt investigators for decades. Where did he go? The last known murder was in 1986. And then, for the first time in 12 years, there was silence. The phone calls stopped. The attacks ceased. The predator who had cut a violent path across the length of California simply vanished, leaving behind a constellation of cold cases, dozens of shattered lives, and a ghost that haunted the memories of an entire generation of law enforcement. For decades, that ghost would live in evidence lockers and dusty file cabinets, a phantom defined only by the pain he had caused. The hunt was over. But for a select few, the obsession was just beginning. In 1994, a young forensic scientist named Paul Holes was sworn in as an investigator for the Contra Costa County Sheriff's Office. That same year, he opened the files of the East Area Rapist for the first time. The sheer scope of the crimes, the methodical cruelty, and the profound fear in the victim's statements struck him. As he later recalled, it was one of those cases that you come across that strikes you not just because of the scope of the series of crimes or the number of victims, but the actual fear of the victims and the actual reality of what they went through. That immediately struck me. The case became his personal crusade, an obsession that would follow him for the next 24 years, a constant presence that he admits contributed to the end of his first marriage. He became the case's living memory, the one man who knew every detail, every lead, every dead end. At the same time, a writer named Michelle McNamara was embarking on her own obsessive journey. She was a gifted journalist with a deep empathy for victims, and she was frustrated by the fractured, confusing monikers given to the killer. In a 2013 article for Los Angeles Magazine, she gave him a new name, one that captured the full, terrifying scope of his reign: the Golden State Killer. The name stuck. It unified the narrative, galvanized public interest, and gave the Phantom an identity he couldn't escape. McNamara, like Holes, became a keeper of the flame, poring over police reports, interviewing victims, and building a partnership with the very investigators she chronicled. She was, as Paul Holes would later say, a partner with me in this. Tragically, Michelle McNamara died suddenly in 2016. Her definitive book on the case, I'll Be Gone in the Dark, left unfinished. She would never see the ghost unmasked. For years, the investigation was a study in frustration. But in 2001, science provided the first real spark of hope in over a decade. DNA technology, still in its relative infancy, delivered a stunning revelation. A sample from a murder scene in Southern California was a perfect match to a sample from a rape scene in Northern California. The East Area Rapist and the original Night Stalker were the same man. It was a landmark moment. The map of fear was now connected by a single, invisible thread. Investigators finally knew they were hunting one man, but they still had no idea who he was. The DNA profile was run against the National Criminal Database, CODIS, again and again. No matches. The ghost had a genetic fingerprint, but no name. By 2017, Paul Holes was 9 months from retirement. The Golden State Killer case was the one great failure of his career, a promise to victims he had been unable to keep. The DNA evidence, once a source of hope, was now a source of frustration. He had dipped into the precious samples time and again to test new theories, and the evidence was dwindling. He knew he had one last chance. He had heard about a revolutionary new technique, one that was ethically murky and had never been used to hunt a serial killer. It was called investigative genetic genealogy. The idea was both simple and audacious. Take the killer's DNA, not to a criminal database, but to a public one, a genealogy website where ordinary people upload their genetic profiles to find long-lost relatives. It was a long shot, a needle in a haystack of human DNA. But it was all he had left. He reached out to a woman named Barbara Ray Venter, a retired patent attorney who had become a leading expert in the field. Ray Venter was not a cop. She was a scientist and a genealogist who had used her skills to help adoptees find their birth parents. In 2017, Holes called her with an unprecedented request. Could she use the same technique to build a family tree for a killer? Intrigued by the challenge, she agreed. Investigators took a preserved DNA sample from the 1980 murder of Charlene and Lyman Smith in Ventura County and sent it to a lab to create a comprehensive genetic profile, the kind used by consumer ancestry sites. Then, they uploaded that profile to a public, open-source genealogy website called GEDmatch. They did not get a direct hit. The Golden State Killer had not uploaded his own DNA. But they got something just as valuable: a list of people who shared enough DNA with the killer to be his distant relatives. Third, fourth, even fifth cousins. None of these people were suspects. They were ordinary citizens who had used an ancestry service out of curiosity, unknowingly providing the first breadcrumbs on a 40-year-old trail. For law enforcement, this was uncharted territory. It raised profound ethical questions about genetic privacy and consent. To find one man, they were peering into the genetic code of hundreds of innocent people, using a tool for family connection as a weapon for the hunt. With the list of distant relatives, Barbara Ray Venter began her work. It was a monumental task of reverse engineering a family. She took the genetic matches and began building family trees for each one, tracing their lineages back through the 1800s, searching for a common ancestor, a single set of great-great-great-grandparents, from which both the relative and the killer must have descended. Once she found that common link, she began building the family tree forward again, through generations of births, deaths, and marriages, creating a vast web of potential suspects. She was, as she later said, building the family tree of a killer. Working with Holes and a small dedicated team, she began to narrow the search. They were looking for a man of a specific age who would have been in the right locations in California at the right times. The tree had thousands of branches. One by one, they were pruned away. Men who were too old, too young, who were overseas, who were in prison, all were eliminated. The work was painstaking, a digital manhunt fought with census records, obituaries, and public documents. The pressure was immense. The team knew they were closer than anyone had ever been. Then, after weeks of relentless work, the tree narrowed to two final candidates. One of them was a 72-year-old man living in Citrus Heights, a suburb of Sacramento, in the very heart of the East Area Rapist's original hunting ground. His name was Joseph James D'Angelo. He was a Navy veteran. He was a former police officer. He had been fired in 1979 for shoplifting a hammer and a can of dog repellent. The timeline was a perfect, chilling match. Ray Venter recalled the moment of discovery. "I'm sitting there at 3 a.m, all by my little lonesome, staring at my computer," she said. "I know who you are. You're Joseph D'Angelo." At that moment, besides the killer himself, she was the only person in the world who knew his name. It had taken her just 63 days, but her word wasn't enough. As she noted, "I'm providing an investigative lead. You still need some old-fashioned detective work." They needed D'Angelo's DNA for a direct comparison. Investigators began round-the-clock surveillance on his quiet, suburban home. They watched him go about his life, a seemingly ordinary retiree. They waited for him to discard something, anything, that would carry his genetic code. Finally, after days of watching, they got their chance. They collected an item D'Angelo had thrown away, a tissue from his trash can. They rushed it to the lab. The results came back. The DNA on the tissue was a perfect match to the DNA from the semen left at a dozen crime scenes decades earlier. They had him. The ghost finally had a name, a face, and an address. The hunt was over. On the morning of April 24th, 2018, in a quiet beige bungalow on a suburban street in Citrus Heights, California, a 72-year-old man was puttering around his yard. To his neighbors, he was just Joe, an odd man with a short temper, known for loud, profane outbursts while working on his boat or tending to his lawn. But on that morning, a team of detectives was waiting. When he stepped outside, they moved in, ending the longest and most terrifying manhunt in California history. The ghost who had haunted the state for 44 years, the phantom known as the Golden State Killer, was finally unmasked. And the face of evil was shockingly, terrifyingly banal. The revelation sent a shockwave through the communities he had terrorized. This was not a mythical boogeyman, but a man who had lived among them, hidden in plain sight. He had raised 3 daughters, coached Little League, and worked a steady job as a truck mechanic at a Save Mart distribution center. The profound horror of the case settled into a new, more intimate key. The monster was a neighbor, a father, a public servant. He had been a police officer in Exeter during the reign of the Visalia Ransacker, and an officer in Auburn during the first wave of the East Area Rapist attacks. The knowledge he gained from wearing a badge, his understanding of police procedure, of evidence collection, of the patterns of an investigation, he had weaponized against the very people he had sworn to protect. It was the ultimate betrayal. His former police chief, Nick Willick, who had fired him in 1979 for shoplifting, could only state the unbelievable truth. There was nothing, really, while he was working at the Auburn Police Department, that would say he was a mass murderer, serial rapist, burglar. When Joseph James D'Angelo Jr. was finally brought into a courtroom, he was a study in contradiction. Slumped in a wheelchair, dressed in an orange jumpsuit, he appeared frail, confused, and feeble. But prosecutors painted a very different picture, one of a lifelong manipulator performing his final act. They told the court that just days before his arrest, detectives on surveillance had watched him vigorously working on his yard, jumping in and out of his truck, and lifting heavy objects. A week prior, he was seen racing his motorcycle on the freeway. This was the same man who, when caught shoplifting in 1979, faked a heart attack, screaming incoherently until he later admitted he had just pretended to act crazy to avoid getting in trouble. The most chilling insight into his psyche came not from what he said to detectives, but from what he said to himself. Left alone in an interrogation room after his arrest, a hidden microphone captured the 72-year-old man muttering. He spoke of an inner personality, a dark force he called Jerry, who he claimed was responsible for the decades of horror. In a raspy, rambling monologue, he said, "I did all that. I didn't have the strength to push him out. He made me, he went with me. It was like, in my head, he's a part of me. I didn't want to do those things. I did all those things. I've destroyed all their lives. So now I've got to pay the price." It was not a confession born of remorse, but a final, pathetic attempt at abdication. The legal path to justice was complex. Due to California's statute of limitations, D'Angelo could not be prosecuted for the dozens of rapes he committed in the 1970s. The case itself was massive, involving more than 1.3 million pages of discovery across 6 different counties. A trial was expected to last up to a decade, a timeline that many of the elderly victims and witnesses would not survive. And so, prosecutors offered a deal. In exchange for pleading guilty to everything, the 13 murders and 13 kidnappings he was charged with, and admitting to the dozens of rapes and burglaries for which he could not be charged, they would take the death penalty off the table. On June 29th, 2020, the reckoning began. Because of the pandemic and the sheer number of victims and family members who wanted to attend, the hearing was held in a cavernous ballroom at Sacramento State University. At the center of the room, Joseph D'Angelo sat in his wheelchair, a transparent face shield covering his mask. And one by one, as the clerk read the name of each of his murder victims, he spoke. In a weak, raspy voice, he answered, "Guilty." to the special circumstances of rape and burglary, he answered. I admit. For 40 years, these crimes had been the work of a nameless phantom. Now the man himself was giving them his name. But the true measure of justice in this case would not come from the mouth of the killer. It would come from the voices of those he had tried to silence forever. Over 3 extraordinary days, in August of 2020, dozens of survivors and family members stood in that same ballroom and confronted the man who had shattered their lives. It was a marathon of pain, rage, and resilience. Chris Pedretti, who was just 15 when D'Angelo attacked her in 1976, looked directly at him.
D'Angelo, yielding a knife, told me he would kill me if I didn't do what he demanded. He raped me, repeatedly.
He tormented me and told me over and over again he would kill me, and I believed him, she said, her voice shaking but strong. D'Angelo stole my formative years. He stole my youth, my innocence, my faith, and my trust. Who could I have grown up to be? I guess I will never know. Your secrets have been exposed. Your double life is over. The world, and I mean the entire world, knows who you are and what you did. You will forever be known as a repulsive coward who hid behind a mask of evil. The children of his murder victims spoke of a grief that had spanned generations. Debbie Domingo, whose mother, Sherry Domingo, was murdered alongside her boyfriend, Gregory Sanchez, in 1981, described a life lived in the shadow of that horror. I was a traumatized teenager, reeling from the horror and pretending to be an okay version of me, she said. When D'Angelo stole my mom from me, he stole my vision of the future. Jennifer Carroll, the daughter of Lyman Smith, who was murdered with his wife Charlene in 1980, spoke of the silver linings, the powerful, unbreakable bonds formed between the survivors. We had a common bond, she said. Chris and I will be friends for life now. In the courtroom, they sat together, a silent testament to a community forged in shared trauma. Patricia Murphy, who was raped in 1976, had her daughter read her statement. He and his knife had complete control over me for the next 2 hours, the statement read. He truly is an evil monster with no soul. Even D'Angelo's own family was given a voice. A statement from his ex-wife, Sharon Huddle, was read into the record. For years, she had believed his lies about work trips and family visits. His actions have had a devastating and pervasive effect on my life and my family, she wrote. I now live every day with the knowledge of how he attacked and severely damaged hundreds of innocent people's lives and murdered 13 innocent people who were loved and have now been missed for 40 years or more. Through it all, D'Angelo sat silent and motionless, his face a blank mask. He did not look at the people whose lives he had destroyed. He did not react as they wept, as they shouted, as they held up photographs of the loved ones he had taken from them. He was a black hole of empathy, a void where a soul should have been. On August 21st, 2020, the final day of sentencing, he was given one last chance to speak. He rose shakily from his wheelchair, took off his mask, and faced the court. In that same quiet, raspy voice, he said,
"And I'm truly sorry to everyone I've hurt.
I've listened to all your statements, each one of them, and I'm truly sorry for everyone I've hurt." The apology was a drop of water in an ocean of pain. It was too little, 40 years too late. The judge sentenced him to 11 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus 15 concurrent life sentences. He would die in prison. The legal case was over. But the final judgment in the story of the Golden State Killer belongs to his victims. They endured the unthinkable. They waited for a justice that seemed like it would never come. And when the moment finally arrived, they stood, took back their voices, and spoke their truth to the man who had tried to leave them silent in the dark. The boogeyman was finally gone. And they, the survivors, were the ones left standing in the light.